Yeah. You're listening to Autodesk's Digital Builder Podcast, a show that inspires construction professionals to innovate and use technology to improve how they build our world. I'm Eric Thomas, and I've been working in construction for nearly a decade. And now I have the privilege to sit down with industry trailblazers to hear how they're solving construction's biggest challenges and redefining the future of the built environment. Welcome to another episode of Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. I am your host, Eric Thomas, and today we're going to talk about the way the construction industry designs and makes the world and how it is constantly evolving. And many leaders in our industries are trying really new approaches and trying to meet the needs of our communities. And today on this episode, I'm joined by two leaders from BamCore who are tackling this industry's need for finding innovative materials and processes and using materials like bamboo and eucalyptus. And so sitting in front of me today is Kate Chilton, the Chief Sustainability from BamCore, and Zack Zimmerman, the co-founder and Chief Commercial Officer. So Zack, Kate, how are you doing today?
Doing well. It's really great to be here. You guys have a beautiful space and we feel very welcome. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd echo that. It's a wonderful day. And for those who are not in San Francisco, it's actually blue skies and 65. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, we're doing okay on that front. And it's always good to get back into the city. I really moved away a couple of years ago, but the Autodesk facility is beautiful. And I'm always grateful that we have the opportunity to film in here. And, I'm just really excited to start getting into what BamCore does because you're doing some neat work. And I've learned a lot, even just in our very brief conversations coming up into this episode. You're really offering innovative options for builders to consider for their projects. So, Zack, give me a high level. What does your company deliver for your customers?
So we're a component manufacturer of panelized wall systems. So what does that mean? What is a panelized wall system? Essentially, what we do is we have 4 foot wide by 8, 9, or 10 foot tall sheets that are then deployed through a model that is supported by Autodesk that allows us to digitize a plan set and then drop a set of prefabricated, unbelievably millimeter accurate sets of panels to the job site for an ease of installation in the field.
And I love that accuracy point you're talking about too, because the prefabrication conversation has really evolved in the last 5 to 10 years, I think. And folks are embracing it in a way that I think they were more hesitant to. And I think the accuracy part was a big part of that because early on, I feel like folks had gotten a little bit burned with if something shows up on site and it doesn't fit, it's not built the way that they want. And the expectations, you don't get to make a second impression with this kind of technology when you bring it into the site. And so having that accuracy is incredibly impactful.
It is. On that point, construction itself is not accurate. It's designed in a way to not be millimeter accurate. And even with the accuracy of our system, you still have that flexibility in the field to make the adjustments and changes that you need. So accuracy scares some people away. We don't want people to be scared away. What we want is them to understand that we're giving them something that is ready to go, but is still flexible enough to meet the on-site changes and additions that might need to come through from like an uneven slab or something along those lines. It all can be handled.
You're telling me there's change conditions on a construction project?
Go figure, right?
It's shocking for everybody out there listening. But it does make sense that you still offer that flexibility too. And I've seen a lot of neat stuff like I've seen folks with the metal cantilever and framing that will slide and adjust to fit into your space. And there's just so many options now with prefabrication that I think if people haven't paid attention to it historically, like right now is the opportunity to step back and go, okay, like what is happening in the market right now? Because the options, much like all of the tech that's serving the construction industry, are constantly changing and evolving and getting better.
Agreed.
Kate, I'm curious, how is what you're doing at BamCore different than what we're seeing from other green construction startups in the market? I know there's a ton of buzz about mass timber, and we've had a few episodes about that, and I'm really excited to see where that goes. And so where does BamCore fit in that picture?
Yeah, so I think a good way to answer that question is to help the audience understand the framework by which we think about how we're different. And so that's changing the materials, changing the methods is the framework. And a lot of construction green tech startups are doing one or the other, not both. And so you'll see a lot of modular construction companies are a good example of changing the method, but they're using a lot of the same materials like wood or steel or concrete. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there are companies that are using bamboo or hemp, even green steel or green concrete, but they're fundamentally using them in the same way. And so here at BamCore, we're changing the materials by using fast-growing fibers, being eucalyptus and timber bamboo. And then we're also changing the methods by using this panelized system and layering in a bunch of industrialized construction techniques and approaches. So use of technology, fabrication. And so the combination of these two things are really powerful and unique. And from a sustainability perspective, that results in a powerful combination of addressing embodied carbon and operating carbon. And so the embodied carbon comes from the use of our bio-based materials, these fast-growing fibers that have tremendous carbon removal capacity when compared to slow-growing woods. And then operating carbon comes from the tighter building envelope that we're creating with this panelized system. And again, a lot of solutions that exist do not tackle both. They do one or the other, and sometimes they even do one at the expense of the other. So insulation is a really simple example of a solution that is trying to help reduce operating carbon by creating a more thermally efficient building, but they're often really high in embodied carbon. And so doing both is really powerful and unique.
That's cool. I don't think I've spoken to anybody that is kind of handling it from those two directions at the same time. And the scope and scale is like you mentioned, like mass timber is mass timber. It's a CLT, cross limited timber. There's a very fixed focus area there, but the scale of what you're able to offer brings a lot more to the market, it sounds like, and you're doing some really cool work. So that's awesome. I've got a follow-up question for you on that one. So can you give me some thoughts on what common misconceptions you hear when talking about these alternative materials and strategies that you talked about? I'm sure you have folks come in and go, well, you said all that, but this is what I think about this. And so I'd like to hear what you're hearing most commonly, and then also how you can do away with that a little bit.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to the materials themselves, and I'm sure Zack has additional thoughts. But timber bamboo is commonly thought of as a tree, but it's a grass. And so that fundamentally means it grows different, and that also means that it can be harvested differently. And clear cutting is essentially when you cut the entire crop to harvest it. And that's really detrimental in terms of the soil and biodiversity, and it's not a great practice. But bamboo is really special because there is a rhizome that grows underground and it remains. And so you're able to kind of selectively harvest culms here and there while keeping the plant itself intact. And that's one of the reasons why it's really sustainable. From a eucalyptus standpoint, there's two key ones. One of them is it's thought of as a water guzzler. So it consumes a lot of water in a short amount of time. And that's partially because of its fast growth. It needs it. But when you take a closer look, the amount of water that's consumed as it compares to the biomass that's grown, it's actually very water efficient. So yeah, if you think about the same time span, it'll consume more water, but it'll actually produce more. And so compared to a lot of other commonly used softwoods and trees, it's much more efficient in its water use, and it doesn't quite get credit for that. And then it's also thought of as a highly flammable tree. We're in California.
Yeah.
Now the Oakland tunnel fire was...
That's the first thing that comes to mind for me
Yeah.
when eucalyptus comes up. I mean, there's a
Exactly.
bunch of part where I used to live in the East Bay, and it was always just like, I don't wish that was there.
Yeah.
Because that misconception is common.
It is. It's primarily due to the leaves, the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds that are contained within the leaves. But I think it's important that people separate eucalyptus, the tree, from eucalyptus, the building material. The leaves are removed, it's dried out. And so a lot of the things that make the tree very flammable really don't translate over to the material when it's used in buildings. Of course, it's bio-based, so it's susceptible to fire, but when you look at flame spread indexes, it's no more flammable than the woods that are used in most buildings today.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive when you start getting into the details of that too. I remember when I fairly recently learned that cross-laminated timber in many situations has better fighter ratings than steel does, which was incredible to me. And I know that's a different scope than what we're doing. I'm just being a nerd right now, and I can't help myself. But like I'd also just recently heard that the bamboo is a grass as well, which was something I don't think most folks are understanding. But the the scale of how fast it grows, in most contexts that I hear it, is it's a nuisance. It's something like, oh God, you don't want to plant bamboo in your yard because you won't have a yard anymore. And I think it's such a cool opportunity that you're taking advantage of that in a way where you get to apply that into the alternative materials that we're using. And one more thing, and then I'll stop rambling again. I had no idea that the relationship between the water usage of the eucalyptus and the acceleration of that growth. And when you break it down like that, it does make a bunch of sense. And so there are factors that you have to consider that just don't include the how much does this tree use in this moment. It's like, okay, how much does it use in this moment, but how much tree do you get from that? And it sounds like, all of these things really kind of align together in something that gives a very renewable resource that, renews itself at a pretty rapid scale, which is really impressive.
A big reason for that is the management approach for eucalyptus. And so in most instances, eucalyptus is actually harvested for pulp and paper, sometimes energy. And those are very short rotation cycles, so 4 to 7 years. And when you have such intensive management, it really is unhelpful to the overall hydrological function of the ecosystem. And so there's been studies that show, well, if you extend the rotation and make it more like 10, 12, 15 years, which is what's needed for sawn timber, that's actually an improvement in the overall hydrological function. And so, we hypothesize that if you're able to convert some of these really intensively managed plantations away from pulp and paper towards really high value, durable, long-lived products, it'll actually help with that water story as well.
So that's really cool. I appreciate you kind of dispelling some of those myths. So is there anything else that comes up that you're just like, God, I wish people would stop saying that?
Well, it's funny. You mentioned bamboo, invasive, don't plant it. There's actually 2 broad categories of bamboo. So there's what we call spreaders or runners, which have these very invasive root systems. But there's a whole another sub-variety called clumpers or clumping bamboo. And those just grow within a clump, essentially. And those are the ones that we use. They're called giant clumping bamboos.
Okay.
And you can plant those in plantations much more traditionally than similar to tree plantations. And they're a lot easier to harvest. They're not as invasive. So there's a lot to learn about bamboo.
That's cool. I'm learning a ton of stuff today. This is a fun conversation. I think I'm going to have to look into that one as far as creating a new privacy fence between my neighbor's house and mine.
There you go.
Without destroying my yard. It's going to be good stuff. Well, I've got one more question for you, Kate. I'm looking at this and I'm curious, how does all this come to life? Like, how do you figure all this stuff out? Like, this is such an impressive scope, and there's a lot of nuance to what you're sharing here. So, can you tell me a bit more about the ongoing R&D that your team has going right now?
We are very fortunate to be a part of a Department of Energy research program. It's through their ARPA-E group, which is very similar to DARPA, if people remember that. And it's all focused on the program that we're a part of, is all focused around building decarbonization. And so this grant, we are using it to research more effective ways to produce engineered products from the harvested bamboo. And so plywood manufacturing has had over a century to develop, and the machinery has gotten very advanced and it's very efficient. And that same level of attention just hasn't been given to bamboo. And so we're researching ways to utilize more of the culm to generate less waste, decrease cost. And so that whole grant is really propelling the technology for bamboo manufacturing forward.
As far as development is concerned, the nice thing is we're still small in comparison to a lot of other large engineering wood producers or manufacturers. And so when we send a job or a package of this panelization of these panelized materials out to a job site, if there's changes that we hear feedback from the general contractor or even the electrician or the plumber or something, anyone that's connected to the process, we have the ability to look at that and then try to make small incremental changes. So the very next unit that's dropped, maybe even as soon as 5 days or 10 days later, can have some of those changes already integrated into it.
That's cool.
So we have a fast turnaround. When we get feedback, we try to move on it quickly. And then we standardize if it works.
Yeah, there's something to be said about the nimble state of a company that's smaller and startup stage, where you have that room and you get to build that relationship with your customers and clients. And I'm sure there's a lot of trust that gets built in that moment too, where they give you feedback, and 5, 6, 7 days later, you've given something else that incorporates that. And I couldn't think of a lot of other industries that would be able to support that feedback loop so quickly. I mean, there's usually a lot of R&D that goes into big changes, especially as the company grows in size. So that's a pretty cool offering that you can bring to your organization. So I'm interested in hearing a bit more also, how are your facilities and factories structured? What does that process look like? And where do you source most of your materials? And, where are the factories and what do they look like that are doing all this work?
So we are local to the area somewhat. Our legacy facility where the company was founded is in Windsor, California. So about an hour north from here.
Sonoma County wine country.
It's
Go
beautiful.
figure.
That's a beautiful area. I rode my motorcycle up through there all the time when I was still living in the Bay Area.
Oh, fantastic. We have a fabrication center there. Well, we'll do some of the pre-cutting essentially. But our main facility is in Florida, in Ocala, Florida. It's actually an old Georgia Pacific mill. And we purchased it, and we now have our main production capabilities there, along with another fabrication center. So we're able to kind of split up where we do the work based on where the end job is and do it closer to the end site. And so that's where we do a lot of our manufacturing today. We also have several manufacturing partners in our supply chain, which has been fantastic. So we have spent a really long time developing the bamboo supply chain. It really did not exist when we first got going. And we've been to well over a dozen countries, all within the tropics and subtropics, analyzed dozens of different types of bamboo and really honed in on what the best species were and where they grow. And so we've gotten them from all over the world, but predominantly today we get our raw materials from South America and Central American countries. So there's really, really beautiful bamboo as well as eucalyptus in those areas. And as I said, we have great partners that are able to assist with some of the kind of pre-processing and pre-manufacturing before we do the final stages in the US.
This is an uninformed question, so excuse me, but I'm curious, would you be able to grow these things in the materials at the scale that you are in Central and South America in the United States with any difficulty, or does the climate not support that very well? I have no idea.
It's a great question. Florida is one of the only places that it can be done. Again, it really, these materials, at least the species that we use, really thrive in tropical and subtropical places. And there absolutely is activity going on in Florida, both on the bamboo and the eucalyptus side. And so we've just started conversations with some of those growers to see if we can become an offtake source for the bamboo that they're just now starting to plant.
That's cool. And I can see why that might contribute to folks not having as much knowledge about that material in North America specifically, just because, the availability of it has a little bit of a different tier than if you are in a more tropical climate.
Well, fun fact, eucalyptus is actually the second most prolifically grown or planted tree in the world.
Really?
Yeah. So there's a lot of it and plenty to go around. The bamboo is a different story. I like to equate it to almost the wine industry, right? Wine industry has terroir, and that means, the valley floor fruit tastes different than maybe the mountain fruit. So the correlation is some of the structural characteristics of the species we work with can be different between the valley floor and on the side of a mountain.
Oh, that's cool.
More sun, more water, less fog, same kind of growth cycle. But it's unbelievably fast. How we get the bamboo versus how we get the eucalyptus is readily available. Bar none.
Yeah.
A lot of it.
Okay.
The bamboo is something that we are still continuing to develop, but there still, in multiple countries, is a lot of it.
And I'm curious, how do you influence builders, especially in areas in North America that folks might not be familiar with some of the materials, like we just alluded to a minute ago? How do you get them to consider these types of materials or these processes and such? How do you change hearts and minds?
That's the $1 million question. And for us, it's always been an answer to the labor problem that we're faced with as an industry. I like to kind of equate it to Tesla, the Tesla effect. Tesla came into the market, the Roadster, and then they obviously got the Model S in, and then so on and so forth, right? And a lot of the early adopters saw the value of not only having something that was unique and cool and fast and sexy, but that they were contributing to doing something possibly better for the planet. So some of our early adopters early on in the company were very much, some of those early Tesla adopters as well.
Yeah, they're on the bleeding edge because they want to be. Like there's a
Exactly.
mindset there too.
Exactly. So at what point does that kind of paradigm shift occur? And for us, it was to be able to prove out that not only are you getting a material that's additive for the climate, but it's not just a material swap for a material. It's a solution. We provide a solution to a builder, to a developer. So if you have the ability in one product to remove or replace multiple other items that go into that building traditionally, well, now you're looking at a highly additive solution.
Yeah.
So, this then begs cost. It's the first conversation I have with everyone.
Yeah.
Right?
How much is that bamboo?
All right. So what is this going to cost me? How much more? And this is where some of the largest developers or builders in the United States understand that, hey, if I can get this material, and even though it's more expensive than just traditional studs, framed 2x4, 2x6, 16 inches on center, but the fact is that I can speed up my build cycle time. I can speed up the process of getting all of my electrical or plumbing or other mechanisms installed in that system, or reduce items that go into that. And at the end of the day, I'm actually building a better product, and I'm on par, or dare I say, getting to the point of being less money, then you have a win-win situation. But that inflection point took a lot of time, and it's still happening. It's still happening across the board. So, we have clients that are represent the uber high end, that want that very large custom home, and they want the green bragging rights, call it. But then on the complete opposite side of that spectrum, we have the large national developers that want to get the first time home buyer in a home, and they want to do that, and they have to do that affordable. And so we're getting in with those.
That's cool.
So we're able to spread across the board, and we have a solution that applies to all sides of the market. And that's largely because of this, again, that dual panel hollow wall. What do you get with that? You get an unbelievably high efficient thermal envelope because of that. So one of the things that we did not say is we pretty much remove about 80 to 90% of all of your traditional timbers that are inside of a wall.
Really?
Big. That's a big deal. Why is that a big deal? Because now you're pulling a lot of that thermal mass, or those thermal bridges, those acoustical bridges, which, by the way, they're one and the same, out of that. And now you have a wall that is got a very high R value, and it's got great sound attenuation. It's very quiet when you're inside of a BamCore home or a commercial building.
I'm going to have to look you up, because I'm building a music studio in my basement, and I got to tamper that a little bit.
It's so our just off the shelf ratings for decibel ratings is actually at a luxury level of a decibel rating.
Wow.
So it's equivalent to like you're in a basement.
That's so cool.
Just with the wall insulated, finished off how you want it. That's the effect, right?
It's such an interesting moment too, because I feel like owners, whether they're giant serial developers or some of the smaller tiers, a lot of them are starting to get a lot more progressive and starting to consider more things like you're talking about here.
Yep.
But they have to understand that story. And if you're talking to somebody and all they care about is, I need to know how much this costs because this is the other thing that costs, and they're not open to hearing where all of these benefits go and what that long-term ownership life cycle looks like and how all of these things are impacted.
Yeah.
you might not have somebody interested in embracing, different technology because they're just so fixated on building that thing. But when people really do start to dig in, I think we have so much opportunity. And it's also a necessity right now because of the labor shortage you mentioned earlier, because of all of the environmental concerns that are happening in the world right now.
Yeah.
Like, this is a multi-tiered thing. And I'm just thankful that folks are having the conversation in a more meaningful way that I feel like they were, even 5-10 years ago when I was starting to get into the construction industry. It's a cool moment for our market very broadly.
One of the to play off this line, one of the fun things that we do is we actually go as far as printing, what some people call cartoons, but it really is just a set of instructions. So there's an individual panel, right? And individual panels come together. They have a shiplap. So those shiplaps connect. And then there's red dots and blue dots. There's different colored dots. And those different colored dots have a different nail that is needed to penetrate it to put it into service. And then we go as far as actually printing the electrical circuitry, yellow lines of where you're going to pull to a switch or a plug, plumbing, cold water lines, hot water lines, drain pipe. So you're putting this together. You can have someone, a framer, that has actually never used a framing gun. And we've seen this. Fun story one day, but we've seen that our system has been able to massively open up the labor pool, because now you don't need that tenured master skilled tradesman to come in and actually operate on the BamCore's system.
That makes a bunch of sense. And I'm a technical writer by trade. I've got a degree in scientific and technical communication. And so the ease of building with the way the instructions are very intentionally put together and thoughtfully put together, that goes so far, because you might be shocked at how easy it is for somebody to misinterpret instructions that you've put together where you feel something is very clear and straightforward and obvious, but it might not, because you don't necessarily have full visibility on what knowledge the person who's reading your instructions have. And so the more you can reduce that to something that anybody can step into, that's really cool. And to be able to bring in more folks who can very quickly get up to speed to the degree where they need to build your stuff, like, we're in a crisis right now with the labor struggles. And so anything we can do to help fill that gap has a huge impact. So I appreciate you sharing that. Well, I'll have to get that story from you later on.
Indeed. Last thing on this is language can be a barrier. And even some people, reading is a barrier.
Yep.
Right. And so we have, because of our, this industrialized method and how all these are cut on CNC, state-of-the-art CNC machines that then have a printing gantry that prints all this stuff on. Only language that's actually on these panels is along the lines of panel. So like EXT for exterior, and then number 1, because everything's sequentially numbered. And interior, INT, sequentially numbered.
I love that too, because there's also an equity conversation that's mixed into that as well. Like, I had the privilege of interviewing John Fish, the CEO of Suffolk Construction, a while back. And John Fish has dyslexia, and he's very transparent about it. And he said that early in his career, he didn't feel like he was going to be able to do what he's doing now. And somebody saw his potential and made the accommodations. And this is a while ago, obviously. He's, probably 50s or 60s. Sorry, John, I'm not sure how old you are. But he's an older gentleman, and those equitable opportunities for access didn't really exist then. And we're getting better about that now. But it doesn't just translate to language. It's, somebody might be neurodiverse, somebody might be in all these different areas. And it gives us more opportunity to access all of these different areas for the talent pool.
Yeah.
So even if you're just thinking about the business side of it, not the humanity side of what you're doing in this moment, there is a reason to be intentional about this, whether, you're building something with BamCore technology or you're doing anything else in a construction project. There's a lot of layers there. And I'm going to take a very hard right turn if I keep going down that rabbit hole. We'll spin back here. That's another episode to get into. But Kate, I've got a question for you here. Let's think a little bit beyond the carbon footprints and the carbon neutral processes and such that we're talking about. Is there more to the story here than just these material costs from what Zack has shared so far?
Yeah, so we're actually not taking as hard of a right turn as I think you may have thought, because we here at BamCore try to think about sustainability more holistically. And so there absolutely is a big environmental component of what we do. But I like to use the Sustainable Development Goals as sort of a framework to really touch on all of the different things that we're doing as it relates to sustainability, beyond just the carbon component. So climate action is one of the goals. That's that carbon piece. But there's life on land by, leveraging bamboo that doesn't need to be clear cut. We're helping to maintain biodiversity. There's a bunch of afforestation and reforestation efforts with bamboo that are underway. And these companies, or these planters, I should say, the developers are looking for off-takers, because in order to maintain a healthy bamboo ecosystem, you actually do need to periodically, maintain it and periodically remove culms. And so being an off-taker for that afforestation, reforestation project is an example of how we're addressing, life on land. There's sustainable cities and communities. So there's a huge housing crisis going on and a huge housing shortage. If we're enabling builders to build faster, we can build more homes in the same amount of time, give people more places to live. We were just talking about, the labor topic that hits directly on economic decent work and economic growth. So helping to open up the labor pool. There's responsible consumption and production. We're reducing job site waste by pre-cutting everything in our factories. So there's so many different ways that we're being sustainable beyond just carbon. And there's even a big movement away from carbon to climate and being climate smart, not just carbon negative.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets into, again, a more holistic approach of thinking about what's the climatological, ecological, socioeconomic impacts of forestry and wood products. And so responsible wood sourcing, getting deforestation-free fibers is part of that, but it's thinking about the soil and the carbon in the soil banks and maintaining root systems. And it's much more extensive than just this one sliver of what it means to be sustainable.
I appreciate that context. So I guess I wasn't going too hard right as far as where I was headed down, but there's just a people conversation that's mixed into this as well. And, not everybody likes going down that rabbit hole, but I'm thankful that even if somebody isn't thinking about it in that framing, there still is a very strong business case to be made for everything you're sharing right now. And so in 10 years, organizations who aren't thinking about these things and thinking very intentional about technology choices and materials choices and alternative ways that we can build, whether it's to, go faster to market to meet those housing needs that we have. The cost of housing is a tremendous barrier, not just in the final cost of the house, but actually thinking about the cost to build it too, because the people who are building them, they've got to go, am I going to make money building this house?
Yep.
And so there's so many layers that we have to think about that I'm just excited that we're talking about it now, because I don't feel like everybody was. And, I think you do have a lot of work in front of you. Let's be real, to continue changing that perspective sometimes. But I'm thankful that you're doing it. And I'm, just excited for what's going to come, because, we have to be more renewable. We can't be, pouring concrete everywhere. Like, everything has to be looked at with this lens of, how can we improve, just for the sake of the people that are doing the building and the people that are living in the communities we build?
Yeah. If it was easy, someone would have done
it. Well, I'm glad that you're here moving things forward. I've got one more question for you today, and it is my favorite one that I always like wrapping up an episode with. And Zack, I'm going to kick this to you first. What is one tool that you'll use on every project, no matter what you're working on?
One tool.
One tool. You only get one.
My brain.
Your brain. I like it. Why?
Because there's something to be said about having your brain turned on, being present, hearing, understanding, listening. That's the most powerful tool each one of us has. And what's nice about our company is we try to have our brains turned on. and we try to listen. And I think if you ask some of our partners in development, they would say that they agree and they appreciate that about us, because we really want to be partner. We want to not be across the table. We want to be next to each other. I want to be able to get an elbow in the side and say, why didn't we think of that? Because to have that state of mind, to have that presence, that's how we move forward. That's how we continue.
I like that answer. Nobody said that. We've done, nearly 90 episodes at this point.
No kidding.
Well, probably when this comes out, it'll be closer to 100, but it's such a good thought because, brain thought. See, I'm making unintentional puns as we get into it here. Sorry, everybody. I can't help that. But it's a good skill or a thing to think about, both from the perspective of management and an organization, but also as an individual, because there's a respect that comes from that as well, where you're truly sitting and listening and present and paying attention instead of just waiting for your opportunity to say words in a moment or a conversation. And I know that's kind of a flippant interpretation of it, and that's not my intention, but it's just so important to really truly pay attention, because that's how you really get to the root of the problem. And that's how you really show somebody actually cares as well. There's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, everyone has additive value one way or the other. And so if you can not be proud, I love eating humble pie 100 times a day. And for us, it's listening, because any individual, inside, outside, 10 degrees of separation, has the ability to look in and say this or that. You have to be able to listen to that and then construct it.
Yeah. And sometimes that feels uncomfortable, but we also have to learn how to be in that moment where it's uncomfortable, because it's okay to be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really what you do next that really is indicative of, your mindset in that moment and how you manage those problems. And I think a lot of people need to really consider that, I guess, that discomfort is okay. It's just how you kind of power through and figure out what comes next that has a big impact. So, Kate, Zack started us with a pretty heavy one here. I'm curious to hear, what is your one tool that you're going to use on every project?
Yeah, I'm going to take the opposite side of this one, somewhat complementary. And this certainly has not been true historically, but increasingly going forward, I find myself leveraging AI as much as I can in my day-to-day work. I think it has tremendous potential to be a productivity enhancer. And so I, less so for things like research, where I need like a deterministic single answer, because we all know the perils of, hallucinating AI and things like that. But specifically for, as like a writing assistant and summarizing meetings and documents, and there's just so much increased productivity that can be gained. And we're still in, inning one of where this can go. But, I think that, there's a lot of concern that, AI is going to be disruptive for knowledge workers, and, AI is going to come take your job. Well, no, I think the person that knows how to use AI is going to take your job.
And that's such a skill set in its own merit too, as far as how do I leverage this tool effectively? I apologize, I cut you off.
Okay.
I get excited about this topic too, because there's two directions you can go with AI. There's the hype train where you go, everything is AI and we're doing AI. We've got AI in our tool, and the development of that may or may not be something that has any real merit in, the realm of what work we happen to be doing. But the people that are being really thoughtful and smart right now are doing exactly what you're saying, is it's how do I streamline and optimize the work that I do in a way that makes it so I can either not have to worry about that, I spend less time doing it, and I can think about something else. Because AI and technology, machine learning, all of these things, they come together in a way that augments what people do. They're not job replacers. Some jobs, let's be real, some jobs might not be jobs in 10 or 15 years. But the average person that's listening to us talk right now is going to have a variation of their job in 5 or 10 years. It's just going to be slightly different. The way that we think about that framework is different. And I think that's what's so important. There's also some risks that come with that as well. You don't want to walk over to OpenAI and go, I'm going to plug in my confidential information into this to see what comes out, because you've put that into that and it might show up somewhere else. And there's a recent episode with May Winfield that you should check out if you're curious about the ethics and risks of using AI in construction. So that is absolutely an interesting conversation. But I think all of us have an opportunity to really, just be smarter to augment the way that we're working. So I like it. It's both sides of things. You're deep into it as far as thinking yourself. You're augmenting so you can get back into that state as far as using your brain as well. So it all is very interconnected. I like it.
Yep.
All
Two
right.
sides of the same coin.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure sitting down and chatting with you both today. Thank you so much for joining me. And for everybody that's out there listening, of course, you've probably figured out by now, I am your trusty host, Eric Thomas. You are listening to Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. If you're not watching us on YouTube, and you should because we are in the beautiful San Francisco office today, make sure you head out to the Autodesk Construction Cloud channel. Otherwise, we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere in the world that you might find us. If you want to shoot me a message and ask any questions, of course, you can also find me on LinkedIn. But until the next time, goodbye.